This interview with Osvel Hinojosa-Huerta was conducted by Helen Ingram and Wendy, Gwynn, Laird Benner in 2010.
So typically we start these interviews with just seeking seeking an understanding about your history and how you got to where you were, sort of a brief encapsulation of, why did you become involved in the Upper Gulf? What led you to do the work that you're doing? So if you could sort of give us a brief history of Osvel and the Upper Gulf and how it happened, that would be fantastic.
Good. I did my undergraduate degree in Guaymas, in Sonora, and when I finished there, I started working there at the school, at the Tecnológico de Monterrey, in Campus Guaymas, with Carlos Valdez and at the Secarena, the Center for Conservation of Natural Resources. And they were doing projects throughout the region. And so they hired me as a research assistant. And the project that I started working on mostly was in the Colorado River Delta region. So I applied for the job because I wanted to be there in Guaymas, not thinking about the project or the Delta or the Upper Gulf. But so that was more or less my first job, working on the Hardy River, Colorado River Delta area, and the project involved partners in the U.S., specifically University of Arizona with Ed Glenn, and with Sonoran Institute with Steve Cornelius and Mark Briggs, and some folks at EDF, also in Pacific Institute. So that's how I started working on the Carlos Valdez and working in this region, and we were knowing the area, collecting information, generating a database. And I really became very interested in the area. I like it very much, so I decided to continue there. So after that I moved to Tucson. I had the opportunity to do my master's degree working with Yuma Clapper Rail. And that was a project that was funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, basically to generate information on the status and abundance, distribution, and habitat use of the Yuma Clapper Rail in Mexico, because everybody knew that Yuma Clapper Rail was there were populations in Mexico, and that it was important, and it was an important conservation target, and also important in terms of binational negotiations for water, but there was no information. So this project was started with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the University of Arizona with Bill Shaw and Steve DeStefano on the School of back then it was called the School of Natural Resources. Now it's the School of Renewable Natural Resources. And so I was the grad student in the project, and I guess in that project I also started working with more people related in the borderlands. And I keep my working relationship with the people in Guaymas, including with Pro Natura. Elena Chavarria was the director then. And so I was working in the Clapper project, but in the summers I was working with Carlos Valdez and Elena in the overall conservation project in the Delta, working with communities and starting some of the restoration work. And after the masters, I decided to stay in Tucson and work more with birds and water, studying the effects of water management on the overall bird community in the Colorado River Delta. And at that time, both Carlos and Elena, they moved to Canada. So we didn't know what we were going to do in terms of the projects of both Secarena and Pro Natura. And so that's when I decided to, well, they invited me and I made the decision to do that, to kind of work on my PhD and start leading the conservation work in the Colorado River Delta for Pro Natura. And then I finished the PhD at UFA and started to work full-time for Pro Natura doing that, leading the project and the restoration program for the Colorado River Delta region.
That's really very helpful.
More or less where I am now.
Osvel, this is Helen Ingram. That's really very helpful to us. Did you work with Robert Mesta when you had money from the Fish and Wildlife Service, or someone else?
No, it was before that. It was before the Sonoran joint venture. It was directly to Region 2.
Okay.
And the contact was Charlie Sanchez. He's retired right now. But so this was in 1999. So and the Sonoran joint venture came in place. I think it was a little bit later. It was in 2001 or so.
Okay.
But yeah, when the Sonoran joint venture started, they invited me to the meetings very early, and I participated, and I have been participating since then, and it has been very, very good group, and I received a lot of support for the early work, bird work in the Delta, and for monitoring the clapper rails after the thesis was completed, so that we could continue doing monitoring work, and also for the bird research overall. So they have been an important part, but it was after the master's degree.
So, Helen, I just want to punctuate here that Charlie Sanchez was one of the 3 triads for the field coordinating committee that Howard Ness and Bo McClure were on. He was the Fish and Wildlife Service representative.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So excellent. Okay.
So let me ask you about Elena and Carlos. Did they return? Are you now working with them, or are they still up in Canada?
Yeah, they returned. So after they went to work with the Commission on Environmental Cooperation, and then it was a 3-year position. So when that was completed, Carlos returned, and he started working for Sonoran Institute for a while, and that didn't work very well. And so he returned to Pro Natura. Now they're working in Pro Natura. We're not working in the same office. They started a program in southern Sonora for Pro Natura, and now they live in Alamos.
Okay, wonderful.
I wonder if I could follow up a little bit about the other graduate students that Bill Shaw had, who now work on the border, and whether or not you continue to know them and collaborate with them, and perhaps some other people. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, most of us were together in the undergraduate program, also in Guaymas. So, well, actually, Luis Burillon and Jorge Torres, they were the first ones to go with Bill Shaw, and they were doing their master's degree in Guaymas, while the rest of us were doing the undergraduate degree. And now they work in an organization called COBI, Conservación y Biodiversidad.
Yeah.
And they work throughout the Gulf of California, and they also have a program in the Caribbean. And yeah, we're pretty much in touch. And then other students, Jacqueline Garcia, she was a student mostly with Ed Glenn, but also with Bill Shaw. Bill Shaw was in her committee. She works at a research center called CIAS in Guaymas, and she does a lot of ecotoxicology research in the Delta, and we collaborate a lot. And then Richard Kutney, I guess Richard, he has been working in the Upper Gulf. He was collaborating with Cero, and he's now with the PACA Foundation. And yeah, he's a great contact. and yeah, we talk a lot.
What was Richard's last name?
Kutney, Cudney.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to Sado? We spend a lot of time talking to Peggy.
Yeah. Well, we haven't done a lot of projects together, but in many things we have similar positions. So when in relation to policy, environmental policy, or development, so it's more a relationship of support rather of direct collaboration. Because she works mostly on the Rocky Point region and in the marine part near Rocky Point, and we have been working more on the Delta part, Mexicali Valley Delta, and a little bit of the Upper Gulf, near the Gulf of Santa Clara, and so we have a little bit of different geographic region. So we don't have, for example, we don't have a lot of projects together. We have more projects together with Sonoran Institute, for example. But CERO has been a very important organization in the region for 30 years now. And I guess a lot of people have gone through CERO at some point or another in the formation or in the early years. I spent one summer there at CERO helping actually Richard Goodney with some of his research with snails, of the snail fisheries. So yeah, it has been a very important organization for the region, but also for the people that work in the Gulf of California region.
I don't want to get us away from our subject of networks very far, but your discussion of SATO prompts me to ask a question that others have questioned us about, and that is about how organizations get along in a situation where they're all working sort of in the same territory, and how they avoid competing for resources. You're suggesting that part of it is a geographical niche, that people choose to do one thing or the other and then others collaborate with them. Could you help me a little here?
Yes, and one is that, and yes, and I guess with the case of, for example, Pronatura and CERO, I think that the niche itself, it was not a strategy to avoid competition for resources. I guess it was just more based on targets or the goals of the organizations. So in the case when the goals are more similar in geographic regions are more similar, for example, Sonoran Institute and Pronatura with our Colorado River Delta programs, that's a case in which competition could be problematic. And so what we have done to avoid competition is that we basically decided very early that we will write grants together and we will collaborate in the elaboration of those grants. And we set set out like a set of rules of that one organization could not write a grant, including the name of the other without consulting and things like that. And if one organization wanted to approach a particular donor without the other, that was okay, but we should be upfront of what we're doing in terms of grant writing and fundraising. And pretty much it has been working very good in the sense that a lot of the fundraising that we do it together, and we write a lot of proposals together to different sources, to NAUCA, to foundations, to Fondo Mexicano, and it implies more time and having to dedicate this effort to maintain kind of a joint vision of where we want to go. But it works pretty well, and even if it's the same region, there is still a lot of things that need to be done by different agencies and people and organizations. So it has been worked pretty well. And we do more or less the same with Environmental Defense Fund also.
Have you articulated the strengths that each of those entities come to the table with?
Can you repeat that?
have you articulated the strengths that each of the organizations come to the table with? I mean, collaboration in that respect could be challenging, as you mentioned, but Jennifer Pitt, for example, had acknowledged that, Pro Natura brings something and they bring something and Sonoran Institute brings something, and so there's also this sense of contribution.
Right. And I guess that's exactly the point, that we see benefit in contributing with the other, and it's not just for the sake of contribution. The goal is not to create a network, is that we create a network because we feel that we can be much more effective in having success in conservation by doing the network. And yeah, absolutely. For example, with Sonoran Institute, with Francisco Zamora in particular, he's the leader of the Colorado River Delta program. They bring a lot to the table, for example, in terms of active restoration for the projects that require restoration on the ground. They have developed an expertise on that topic. And also, for example, even though it's this region, but it's a very big region, and we both work mostly, we both work in the whole Delta region, but we work mostly on the eastern Delta, like the Cienega, Santa Clara, and some portions on the Colorado River on the eastern side, like the Limitrof region. And Sonoran Institute has been concentrated more on the western part, on the Rio Hardy area in particular. So, yeah, so we complement each other that way. And for example, we have been working more on the water policy issues, and also some of the more on the ecological monitoring and aspects of the work in the Delta.
So this raises a question for me about trust. It would seem that there would have to be a building of pretty strong trust to do basically what you've done.
Was that possibly because you knew these people separately and before, or was this a trust you built in process?
Well, it's different with them. So, for example, Francisco, I knew him. We used to work together in Guaymas with Carlos Valdez, and then he moved to other jobs with Conservation International first, and then he went to Sonoran Institute for this job, and that was fantastic because we already knew each other, and I was working in Pro Natura, and so that was very easy, but it also required the institutional trust besides me and Francisco, and I think that was built throughout the years, and that started very early on in the process, like in 1996, 1997, and with different people, and so I think it has been evolving and becoming more strong through the years, and knowing the people helps a lot. And then, for example, with EDF, it was different. I met Jennifer Pitt because of working together in Colorado River issues, and I guess through the years we have been building this trust in each other.
Okay, I wonder if we can go back then to building out this larger network we're talking about. Here we've been talking about relationships with other environmental organizations that have sort of multiple different interests and get involved in different projects. Can we now talk about relationships with community-based organizations? And the Asociación Ecológica de Usuarios del Rio Hardy, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that organization got founded, whether or not it's at all similar to some of the other organizations like COBE, or whether its founding was different than that.
Yeah. I think it's very different and very, very unique. And maybe there are similar organizations in Baja California Sur, but for the region, I think it's very unique. And so the way it was formed, it started with these early projects in the Colorado River Delta, 1997, 1998, in which a big part of that was a very strong public involvement and community outreach program. So doing workshops with the communities and just gathering information on what were the important resources for them, the main environmental problems, and the solutions that they thought that could be implemented. And this generated a lot of interest, actually more than we expected, and particularly along the communities of the Hardy River. So because there is that's probably the area in the Delta that has more link between the people and the river and the wetlands. And because there are tourist camps, the sport fisheries, there is also sport hunting, the Kukapa community is there, there is also some economic or artisanal fisheries, but for not just for subsistence or for recreation, but also for selling, for commercialization. So there was already a lot of interest in having a healthy river. And so when we started these projects, they got excited, and this prompted communication between different groups that usually they were not talking to each other. But they saw that together they can create like a strong group, a strong voice for the river, and that can help them get something done with the agencies in Mexicali and to solve some of the problems. So it was basically the result of this environmental program that was done together between Pro Natura, Secarena, and Sonoran Institute. And so at the end of that program, I mean, there was a big meeting about 80 people that show up, and they decided, we were thinking about forming like small commissions or small groups that would tackle particular problems, and they decided that they wanted to do more than that, and that they wanted to form an organization, an assay, a non-profit, to put all the commissions together and start working, and they did. So that was the beginning of that, and they got support from us in Sonoran Institute in this process of forming the organization and creating the statutes and forming the board, etc. But it was basically a decision that came from them, that resulted from these projects. So it's very different from COVID. For example, in terms that COVID was formed from environmental professionals, wanted to have the organization through where they can manage and implement research and conservation projects. And IORIC is more a grassroots organization of the people that live in that particular area that just want to form this organization as a voice to try to have a healthier river.
Can I ask you a little bit about where initiative comes from? Clearly the initiative for Kobe came from the top, and what you're suggesting here is that the Rio Hardy people of various stripes had a lot to do with forming their own group here, and you facilitated it by money and encouragement. Is that fair? Yeah. Then the question becomes, what in general is the relative role of local groups in helping you set an agenda? How is it that you pick a topic? Maybe the Colorado River Delta's project isn't the best example here, but I'm more interested in these border restoration projects in general and how the lines of influence go here.
That's a very good question. I guess how we define the agenda or the priorities, it's a combination, and certainly what the aspects or the priorities that are put forward by IORIC are very important in projects that we implement. And in many times what we have been doing is that they identify like a priority or an issue that needs to be tackled. And what we do is that we help them develop a project and a proposal that could be sent to a particular foundation, and so that they can have funds along maybe with a little bit for us to also know an institute to help them for implementation, and so that's one of the things that has been happening. But then overall for the Delta, that was a big issue. What are the priorities and how do we decide the agenda and the projects, and what we decided to do in 2002 was develop this conservation priorities document. So, and actually it was a 3-year process. It started with a very large workshop, bringing everybody together and saying, okay, let's sit down for 3 days and develop, well, what are the important resources, and then what are the conservation priorities, what do we want to achieve in the Delta. And then after that you follow a series of analysis and to write this document. And it has been really, really important because that's like the map of the blueprint of where we want to go, and it helps us keep concentrated on where we want to go. And so that's the basis. And then
who put together the workshop? Osvel, who put together the workshop and how many people came? Who put it together and how many people came? The workshop.
It was put together by about, I guess, 7, 8 organizations. So it was Sonoran Institute, EDF, Pronatura, CIA, WWF was involved, TNC was involved, the National Institute of Ecology from Mexico also was involved as the organizers. And maybe I'm missing somebody. UFA probably also as organizers. If I can find the reports, I can tell you. But more or less, it was a big group of organizations that were putting together the workshop, and then